Stop drinking these 8 beverages that age your brain. What if the very drink you had with breakfast this morning is quietly aging your brain faster than a pack of cigarettes? Most people assume memory loss simply comes with age, something inherited, something inevitable. But a growing body of research suggests that what you drink day after day may be shaping how your brain ages, long before the first signs of forgetfulness ever appear. Stay with us because one of the 8 beverages on this list is something nearly everyone watching has had this very week. And by the time we reach it, you may want to grab a pen. This video is intended for general educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you have concerns about your own brain health, please speak with a qualified healthcare provider. Over the next few minutes, we are going to walk through 8 everyday beverages that researchers have linked to accelerated brain aging, faster cognitive decline, or increased risk factors tied to conditions like dementia. Some of these will surprise you, and a few may already be sitting in your refrigerator right now. So stick around, because by the end, you may look at your kitchen counter a little differently. Let's start by understanding something important. The brain is one of the most metabolically demanding organs in the human body. Even though it makes up only about 2% of total body weight, it uses roughly 20% of the body's energy. That means anything that disrupts blood sugar, blood flow, inflammation, or hydration can have an outsized effect on how well the brain functions, and over decades, how well it ages. Beverages are easy to overlook because we don't chew them, we don't measure them the way we might measure a meal, and many of them slip into our routines as background habits rather than deliberate choices. That is exactly why they deserve a closer look. Think about your own week for a moment. The coffee that gets you out the door, the soda that comes with lunch, maybe a glass of wine to close out a long day. None of these choices feel significant in isolation. A single can of soda has never sent anyone to the hospital, and a single glass of wine has never erased a memory. But the brain doesn't experience life one day at a time. It experiences life as an accumulation. And researchers who study cognitive aging are increasingly interested in exactly this kind of cumulative, repeated exposure rather than isolated events. It also helps to understand why the brain is so sensitive to what circulates through the bloodstream in the first place. Unlike most organs, the brain is protected by something called the blood-brain barrier, a selective filter that normally shields brain tissue from many substances found in the blood. However, this barrier is not impenetrable, and certain conditions, including chronic inflammation and long-term high blood sugar, may gradually affect how well that barrier functions. When that barrier becomes less effective over time, some researchers believe the brain may become more vulnerable to processes linked with cognitive decline. This is part of why lifestyle factors, including what we drink every day, have become such an active area of research in neuroscience and preventive medicine. Number 1. Sugary soft drinks. Regular soda, the kind loaded with high fructose corn syrup or refined sugar, has been one of the most studied beverages in relation to brain health. Multiple long-term studies, including research published using data from the Framingham Heart Study, have associated higher sugary drink consumption with smaller brain volume and poorer memory performance in later years. The proposed mechanism involves chronically elevated blood sugar, which may contribute to insulin resistance not just in the body, but potentially within the brain itself. Some researchers have even used the term type 3 diabetes when describing the relationship between insulin resistance and Alzheimer's disease, although this remains an area of ongoing scientific debate rather than settled fact. Consider Frank, a retired mechanic who spent 30 years drinking 2 to 3 cans of regular cola every single day. For Frank, it wasn't about the taste as much as the routine. The can with lunch, the can in the afternoon, the can while watching the evening news. When his daughter encouraged him to speak with his doctor about some memory lapses in his early 70s, the conversation eventually turned to his daily habits, and his soda consumption came up as one modifiable factor worth discussing. Stories like Frank's don't prove causation on their own, but they do reflect patterns that researchers have observed at a population level. The concern with sugary sodas isn't just the sugar itself, it's the frequency and volume. A single can of regular soda can contain around 39 grams of sugar, and when that is consumed daily over years, the cumulative exposure to blood sugar spikes may quietly affect blood vessels throughout the body, including the small vessels that feed the brain. There is another layer to this story that often gets overlooked: the effect of sugary drinks on the liver and on visceral fat, the type of fat that accumulates around internal organs. Some researchers believe that visceral fat behaves almost like an active organ itself, releasing inflammatory compounds into the bloodstream. Chronic low-grade inflammation of this kind has been studied as a possible contributor to the kind of slow, cumulative brain changes associated with aging. This doesn't mean a single soda triggers inflammation in any meaningful way, but a daily habit sustained over 10, 20, or 30 years is a very different exposure than an occasional treat at a summer barbecue. It's also worth mentioning that many people don't think of soda as a daily habit until they actually track it. Nutrition researchers often note that when people are asked to log their beverage intake for even a single week, they are frequently surprised by how much sugar accumulates from drinks alone, separate from food. This is one of the simplest exercises worth trying, not to induce guilt, but to build genuine awareness of a pattern that so easily becomes invisible. Number 2, excessive alcohol consumption. This one often surprises people, not because the connection is unknown, but because the threshold for harm may be lower than many assume. Heavy and prolonged alcohol use has long been associated with brain shrinkage, particularly in regions responsible for memory and executive function, such as the hippocampus and frontal lobe. The World Health Organization has stated that no level of alcohol consumption is considered completely safe for the brain, a position that has shifted significantly from decades past, when moderate drinking was sometimes described as potentially protective. Margaret, a retired schoolteacher, used to describe her nightly glass of wine as her way to unwind. Over the years, that one glass occasionally became two, especially during stressful seasons of life. When she brought up occasional word-finding difficulty with her physician, alcohol use was one of several lifestyle factors discussed as part of a broader conversation about brain health, alongside sleep quality and stress management. Her experience reflects how gradually habits can shift, often without much conscious awareness. Chronic heavy alcohol use may also interfere with thiamine absorption, a vitamin essential for healthy brain function. In severe cases, this can contribute to a condition known as Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, which involves serious and sometimes irreversible memory impairment. This is an extreme outcome, not a typical one, but it illustrates why alcohol deserves more attention than it often receives in everyday conversations about brain aging. Number 3, energy drinks. Energy drinks combine two ingredients that, in high concentrations, may place additional stress on the cardiovascular and nervous systems: caffeine and sugar. A single can contain caffeine levels comparable to several cups of coffee, along with sugar content that rivals or exceeds a can of soda. The combination may lead to sharp spikes in heart rate and blood pressure, which over years of repeated use, some researchers believe could affect the delicate blood vessels that supply the brain with oxygen and nutrients. There is also a less discussed factor: sleep disruption. Energy drinks are often consumed later in the day, whether during a night shift, a late study session, or simply to push through afternoon fatigue. Poor sleep quality has itself been strongly associated with impaired memory consolidation, and over the long term, increased risk factors for cognitive decline. So the impact of an energy drink may not come from the beverage alone, but from the ripple effect it has on sleep patterns that the brain depends on for repair and recovery. Younger adults sometimes assume that concerns about brain aging don't apply to them yet. However, some researchers suggest that the habits formed in our 20s and 30s may lay the groundwork for how resilient the brain remains decades later. This doesn't mean occasional energy drinks are catastrophic, but daily or near-daily use, especially at high volumes, may be worth reconsidering. Consider James, a college student who relied on energy drinks to get through late-night study sessions and early morning classes. What began as an occasional tool during exam week gradually became a near-daily habit throughout his 4 years of school. Years later, during a routine physical exam in his late 20s, his doctor asked about his caffeine and beverage habits as part of a general health assessment, not because anything alarming had appeared, but because these questions have become a standard part of preventive care conversations. James realized he had never actually stopped to consider how consistent the habit had become, or how poorly he had been sleeping for years without connecting it back to his afternoon and evening energy drink routine. Regulatory agencies in several countries have also raised concerns about energy drink marketing toward younger consumers, given the combination of high caffeine content, high sugar content, and in some products, added stimulant compounds whose long-term effects are less thoroughly studied. This regulatory attention reflects a broader recognition that energy drinks occupy a somewhat different category than traditional coffee or tea, both in concentration and in the demographic most likely to consume them heavily. Number 4, diet sodas and artificially sweetened beverages. This is the one we mentioned earlier, the beverage that quietly sits on countless desks, kitchen counters, and car cup holders every single day. Diet soda has often been marketed as the responsible alternative to regular soda, free of sugar and nearly free of calories. But some observational studies, including research published in the journal Stroke, have found associations between daily consumption of artificially sweetened beverages and increased risk of stroke and dementia. It is important to note that these studies show correlation, not proof of direct cause, and researchers continue to investigate why this association might exist. One theory involves the way artificial sweeteners may interact with gut bacteria, potentially influencing metabolic processes that extend beyond the digestive system. Another possibility is that people who drink large amounts of diet soda may share other health patterns, such as underlying metabolic conditions, that independently affect brain health. This is why researchers are careful to describe these findings as associations that warrant further study, rather than definitive warnings. Dorothy, a retired librarian, switched from regular soda to diet soda in her 40s, believing she was making a healthier choice. She continued the habit for over 20 years, often drinking 3 or 4 cans daily. When she later read about emerging research on artificial sweeteners, she brought it up with her physician, who explained that while the science is still evolving, moderation and variety in beverage choices is generally a reasonable approach. Her story reflects a broader theme in this video, that even choices marketed as healthy deserve periodic reevaluation as science advances. Number 5, high-sugar fruit juices. Fruit juice often carries a health halo because of its association with fruit, but once fruit is juiced, much of its fiber is removed, leaving behind a concentrated dose of natural sugar without the slower digestion that fiber typically provides. A single glass of orange juice can contain sugar levels similar to a can of soda, even though it feels like a virtuous choice at breakfast. The concern here mirrors what we discussed with sugary sodas. Repeated blood sugar spikes over time may contribute to insulin resistance, and some researchers believe insulin resistance may play a role in the buildup of amyloid plaques, a hallmark associated with Alzheimer's disease. This doesn't mean an occasional glass of juice is harmful. The concern applies primarily to habitual, high-volume consumption, particularly when juice replaces whole fruit as a dietary staple over many years. Whole fruit, by comparison, retains its fiber, which slows sugar absorption and may support more stable blood sugar levels. This is one of the simpler adjustments some healthcare providers suggest, choosing whole fruit over juice when possible, not as a strict rule, but as a small shift that may support long-term metabolic and brain health. There is also a portion size issue that deserves mention. A single orange eaten whole takes time to peel, segment, and chew, which naturally limits how much most people consume in one sitting. Juice removes nearly all of that friction. It's entirely possible to drink the sugar equivalent of 3 or 4 oranges in a matter of minutes without ever noticing, simply because the beverage goes down so easily. This is sometimes referred to by nutrition researchers as reduced satiety, meaning liquid calories tend to feel less filling than the same calories consumed as solid food, which can lead to higher overall intake without a corresponding sense of fullness. None of this is meant to suggest that fruit juice is dangerous in the way some other beverages on this list might be. Many families have long considered juice a wholesome staple, particularly for children. The intention here is simply to encourage a more accurate understanding of its sugar content, so that any decisions about how often to include it in a daily routine are made with full information rather than assumption. Number 6, sweetened coffee and specialty coffee drinks. Coffee itself has actually been associated with some potential cognitive benefits in various studies, largely due to its antioxidant content and moderate caffeine levels. The concern in this category isn't coffee as a plant-based beverage, it's what has been added to it. Many popular coffee shop beverages contain flavored syrups, whipped cream, and sweetened milk alternatives that can push sugar content well beyond what most people realize, sometimes exceeding 50 grams of sugar in a single large-sized drink. When a beverage is consumed daily, often as a comforting ritual, the sugar content can accumulate significantly over a year. Robert, a retired accountant, enjoyed a large flavored coffee drink every morning on his way to the office for nearly 2 decades. It wasn't until a routine checkup revealed elevated blood sugar markers that he began reading nutrition labels for these drinks and was surprised to learn how much sugar was involved. His physician didn't tell him to stop drinking coffee altogether, but suggested exploring lower sugar alternatives, such as black coffee or drinks with reduced syrup, as one piece of a broader approach to metabolic health. This example highlights an important distinction throughout this video. It is rarely the base ingredient that causes concern, but rather what has been added to it and how frequently that combination becomes part of daily life. Number 7. Sports drinks consumed without physical activity. Sports drinks were originally formulated to replace electrolytes lost during intense physical exertion, such as long-distance running or high-intensity athletic training. However, many people consume sports drinks simply as a flavored alternative to water, without the physical activity that would justify the added sugar and sodium content. When consumed regularly without the physical demand they were designed for, sports drinks may contribute unnecessary sugar intake similar to soda, while also adding excess sodium that isn't being used or excreted through sweat. Over time, some researchers suggest that chronically high sodium intake may be associated with elevated blood pressure, which is itself a recognized risk factor for vascular-related cognitive decline, sometimes referred to as vascular dementia. This doesn't mean sports drinks are inherently harmful. For athletes engaged in prolonged, intense exercise, they can serve a legitimate physiological purpose. The concern applies specifically to habitual consumption disconnected from actual physical exertion, a pattern that has become increasingly common as these beverages are marketed more broadly as everyday drinks rather than athletic recovery tools. Take the example of Susan, a retired nurse who began drinking a sports drink every afternoon simply because she preferred the taste to plain water. She wasn't training for anything in particular, and her daily activity mostly involved walking her dog around the neighborhood, hardly the kind of prolonged, sweat-inducing exertion these products were designed to replenish. Over several years, a routine blood pressure check revealed readings that had crept up gradually, and when she reviewed her diet with a nutritionist, her daily sports drink stood out as an unnecessary source of both sugar and sodium that offered no real benefit given her actual activity level. This example illustrates a broader pattern worth remembering throughout this video, that a product's intended purpose and its actual use in daily life can drift apart over time. A beverage designed for elite marathon runners recovering electrolytes after 2 hours of intense exertion serves a very different role when consumed by someone sitting at a desk or watching television, even though the packaging and marketing rarely draw that distinction. Number 8. Excessive high caffeine beverages beyond individual tolerance. Our final beverage category isn't about caffeine itself, since moderate caffeine intake has actually been associated with some potential cognitive benefits in various studies. Instead, this category focuses on caffeine consumed well beyond an individual's personal tolerance, often from multiple combined sources throughout the day: coffee in the morning, a caffeinated soda at lunch, and an energy drink in the afternoon, for example. When caffeine intake becomes excessive, it may interfere significantly with sleep architecture, even in people who feel they can fall asleep without difficulty. Caffeine has a half-life of approximately 5 to 6 hours in most adults, meaning that a beverage consumed in the early afternoon may still be affecting the nervous system well into the evening hours. Since deep sleep is considered essential for the brain's glymphatic system, the process believed to help clear metabolic waste products, including proteins associated with Alzheimer's disease, chronic sleep disruption from excessive caffeine may carry long-term implications for brain health. It is worth emphasizing that individual tolerance varies considerably. What represents excessive intake for one person may be entirely manageable for another. This is precisely why moderation, self-awareness, and attention to how caffeine affects your own sleep and energy levels matter more than any single universal number. Bringing it all together. As we look back across these 8 beverages, a consistent theme emerges. It is rarely a single drink on a single day that causes harm. The concern lies in repetition, in daily habits maintained across years and even decades, often without much conscious reflection. Sugary sodas, excessive alcohol, energy drinks, certain diet sodas, high-sugar juices, heavily sweetened coffee drinks, sports drinks consumed without physical activity, and excessive combined caffeine intake each represent patterns that researchers have associated, to varying degrees, with increased risk factors for cognitive decline and brain aging. One of the most striking pieces of research mentioned earlier deserves repeating. Some studies have found that daily consumption of artificially sweetened beverages was associated with nearly 3 times the risk of stroke and dementia compared to those who rarely or never consumed them. This statistic doesn't mean diet soda causes dementia. It means the association is significant enough that researchers believe it deserves serious attention and continued study. And it is significant enough that many healthcare providers now discuss beverage choices as part of a broader conversation about long-term brain health. None of this is about fear or restriction for its own sake. Small, sustainable adjustments, such as gradually reducing sugary beverage frequency, being mindful of alcohol intake, choosing water more often, and paying attention to how caffeine affects your sleep, may collectively support healthier brain aging over time. If any part of this video resonated with your own habits or reminded you of someone you care about, it may be worth having a conversation with a healthcare professional about your individual beverage choices and overall lifestyle. It's also worth remembering that brain health is never determined by a single factor. Diet, physical activity, sleep quality, social connection, mental stimulation, and genetics all interact in ways that researchers are still working to fully understand. Beverage choices are simply one piece of a much larger picture, but they are a piece that many of us have more control over than we might initially think, since they involve small, repeatable decisions made every single day rather than sweeping lifestyle overhauls. If you're looking for a practical place to start, some healthcare providers suggest a simple approach. Rather than trying to eliminate every beverage on this list at once, choose just one to focus on for the next 30 days. Whether that means replacing one daily soda with sparkling water, cutting back from 3 cups of energy drink-fueled mornings to one, or simply paying closer attention to how much sugar is hiding in a favorite coffee order, small, consistent changes tend to be far more sustainable than dramatic ones. And sustainability is ultimately what matters most when we're talking about habits that play out over decades rather than days. We would genuinely love to hear from you. Which of these 8 beverages surprised you the most? And is there one you are thinking about cutting back on after watching this video? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you found this information valuable, please consider sharing this video with someone who might benefit from it, and subscribing for more evidence-based content on brain health and healthy aging. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.